Well, if you saw my first video in this series and you're still leaning in to doing vinyl playback, turntables, records, all that, vinyl, give me 15 more minutes and I'll get you to tap out. Hi, I'm Bob, and you, my friends, are a citizen of the United States of Analog. I'm glad you are here for part 2 of this series for beginners, for newbies, for people that are just thinking about or just got into vinyl playback, turntables, vinyl, records, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it's a crazy, crazy world. And as I mentioned in my first video, a lot of people, once you start describing all the aspects, all the things that they have to learn, the money they have to spend, they tap out pretty quick. And I don't want you to tap out. I want to bring you into this hobby. I'm having fun with you. I want you in this hobby, but I want you to be in it for the right reasons, and I want you to be sure this is something you want to get into, because, you know, this one thing to get something like this, a Soundburger, which is okay. That's a couple $100. That'll play records. You know, it's got Bluetooth and all that. That's cool. It's not the, you know, the highest end turntable you can buy, and nor is this, though. This is like $1,000, but a lot of adjustments have to be made for this thing to sound right. And there was a day in this country and in this world where just about every dude, especially, knew how to basically dial in a turntable. It was a necessity. In the 60s and 70s, you had to know how to do it. We're going to talk a little bit about turntable setup, accessories, cartridges. All right, before we do any of that, I want you to take a look at my hat today. It's different than the usual hats I wear. I just got this one. That frog image is the iconic Jeremiah the Frog from a mural that late musician Daniel Johnston did in Austin, Texas. And that image has been shared around the world now for a couple of decades. And the Hi, How Are You project is a wellness concept. It has one basic mission, and that's for you just to reach out to somebody. Could be a friend, could be a coworker, a family member, or even a complete stranger. And just look them in the eyes and say, "Hi, how are you? How are you?" And mean it, and listen. And start a conversation about their well-being, your well-being. So often in life we just pass each other on the street and we say things that we don't really mean, like, "Hey, how you doing? What's happening? You good?" And then you just walk on your way. Take the time out to check on somebody else. "Hi, how are you?" HiHowAreYou.org is where you go if you want to learn more about this cool wellness project. So that's it. That's my do-good part of the program here. So let's get down to it. Where do I want to start? We're not going to talk too much about the simple turntables. You've already made that decision, and there's not much adjustment that you can do. But a turntable like this, you know, anything in that 400-500 range and up, at some point, you're going to have to get it out of the box, and you're going to have to follow the manual. You're going to have to RTFM and make your basic adjustments. But I'm going to give you some tips on how to kind of dial in those adjustments a little bit. The first thing you want to do, the very first thing you want to do, is make sure your turntable's level before you do anything. Before you play any records, before you make any adjustments or dial it in, it's got to be perfectly level. And how do we do that? We do it with a level, an expensive audiophile level. Probably $200-300, maybe more. I'm just kidding. Go to your hardware store and get one of these for $2 or $3. This is just a plastic hardware store level. It'll do the trick. Drop it on there. Oh, look at that. I'm dialed in. I'm level, baby. I'm level. You can also get like record weights, and we'll talk about record weights later. This record weight has a level right in it. So that's kind of convenient. And now we're going to talk about your vertical tracking force. What is that? That's the force that the stylus is putting on the record. You want to go as light as possible if you can. That's a sharp object going into a soft piece of plastic. Now something like this tracks at a force of 3 or 4 grams. Wouldn't play my best records on that. Something like this, again, a turntable in that $500 range and up, it's going to track at about 1.8 to 2.2, something like that. And I'm talking about moving magnet cartridges. And for the sake of this video, since we're all beginners here, we're just gonna refer to the moving magnet cartridge. And I'll show you some of my recommendations in and around or under $200 or whatever. So the next thing we have to do is that tracking force, and your turntable is going to come with explicit directions on how to do it by hand, basically balancing the tone arm, then setting this to 0 because it's not going up or down, it's just kind of floating, and then turning that numeric dial to 1.8 or 2 or whatever the manufacturer recommends. So I like to be on that lighter to right in the middle range most of the time. Of course, if it doesn't sound right, then add a little more force or take away some force if you're noticing sibilance or anything like that. That's only going to dial you in pretty close, and some of us want to be exact, and that's why I recommend that you get one of these little babies. And they're not much. They're not much. I'm sure there are very good scales out there. Very good. This one is relatively cheap, and I've been using it for a few years. They come under various names. And this is actually a scale, so you can dial in your stylus force exactly. And as long as we're talking about vertical tracking, there's also a VTA, and that's vertical tracking angle. Your turntable tone arm, in a perfect world, would be perfectly horizontal, perfectly parallel to the surface of the record. But here's the rub. Not all turntables have an adjustment to take the tone arm up and down. And then on top of that, mats are different thickness. Records themselves are different thickness. So you could have the vertical tracking angle completely dialed in, put on a super thick 200-gram record, and guess what? Now your VTA is off. It's not too critical. It's for people that like adjusting things. But here's what I do when my vertical tracking angle, especially when it's kind of on the down slope, where the head shell is a little lower than the back of the tone arm. Get yourself some cheap mats. Like I can add one more mat to this to raise up the record a little bit, or use a thicker mat or whatever. It's a very good way to try to get that surface of the record parallel with the tone arm. That's a vertical tracking angle. Have I lost you yet? Have I lost you yet? Because we're going to talk about anti-skate. I don't actually know a whole lot about anti-skate. I'm assuming that because the record is spinning and the inner wall of the groove is a different diameter than the outer wall of the groove, in a very microscopic kind of level, and something's spinning and maybe centrifugal force. Anyway, whatever the reason, your stylus has a natural tendency to want to go to one side of the groove wall or the other, the left or the right, the inner or the outer. I don't know what causes that. Again, I don't know if it's centrifugal force. I don't know if it's the shape of the groove. That's for you to look up on your own time, all right? But every turntable, or most turntables above a certain range, are going to have an anti-skate calibration dial or a weight that is suspended with, I don't know, a filament, I guess you would call it, that you have to put on different notches depending on what you want your anti-skate force to be. On the dial situation, the manual is going to recommend if you've got a 2-gram tracking force, then you're going to want a 2-gram anti-skate, and there's a dial to do that. I'll forewarn you, and this is a cautionary tale, it doesn't work on a lot of turntables. I don't know why. The cheaper the turntable, the less likely you're going to get any kind of calibration out of the dial. Some people prefer the weight. Some people prefer the dial. I prefer that you get yourself something like this. Again, very cheap, but if I can find one, I'll put a link. You put that on there, you get this spinning, you drop your needle on here very carefully, put it in the middle. You're going to see that it's going to go, unless you've dialed it in already pretty good, it's going to go to the inner part of the record or it's going to go out. Could be slow, could be fast. You've got to be ready to lift up the tone arm at any moment. And then you can start fine-tuning those anti-skate controls until this tone arm stays still. And then you know you're dialed in. You've got peace of mind. You can go to sleep at night. That's That's anti-skate. Many believe it's very important. So we've talked about vertical tracking force, vertical tracking angle, VTF, VTA. We've talked about anti-skate. You've got to decide if you want a tone arm that has a detachable head shell or one that's integrated into the tone arm in one piece that's not detachable. I can tell you that with a detachable one, it's very easy to switch out various cartridges. Now you've got to change your vertical tracking force a lot of times when you switch cartridges, but it makes it very easy to plug in a new one. It also makes it very easy to put in a replacement cartridge. These wires in a head shell, whether it's detachable or fixed, are very, very delicate. Very delicate. I've snapped many in my day. And then you got to take the turntable into a pro unless you know how to solder really well, small wires and little pins and things like that. It's a pain. You got to be very careful when you install your cartridges. You also have to decide whether you want direct drive or you want a belt drive. This is a belt right here. This is a spare belt I have. This is a direct drive turntable, but this is for one of my other turntables. You'll have to do your own research on what you want. Basically, direct drive is instantaneous. Look at that. Just torque, like an electric vehicle, like a Tesla. It's just got instant torque. And that's why a lot of DJs use these, because the ramp up is pretty quick. Belt drive turntables take a little longer to ramp up. Sometimes the belt slips a little bit before it gets going. A lot of people like the belt drive turntables because they feel like the motor is more isolated from the platter, and they feel like there's sonic benefits there. The one thing I want to caution you about if you get yourself a belt drive turntable is also get yourself some disposable gloves. You do not want to handle these with your fingers, and I learned the hard way. I had a project belt drive turntable that started making horrible sounds, lots of distortion. The music didn't sound right. I don't know what was going on. It literally took me months to figure out that because I'd handled the belt so much in the years that I had that turntable, eventually the oils from my fingers just built up and it started slipping on the platter, and it caused all kinds of distortion. If that happens, not to worry, you can actually boil these. And I've boiled many a turntable belt in my day, so you can boil it, kind of clean it, but handle these very carefully. You don't want them slipping on your platter, or forget the belt altogether and get a direct drive turntable. First of all, the Ortofon red or the Ortofon blue. The box is going to look like that. This is the blue. This is a little more expensive than the red. A lot of basic turntables come equipped with the red already installed, but you might want to upgrade to the blue at some point, because it's a much better cartridge, but it's going to cost you closer to $200 or $250. This one came mounted on a head shell, which was nice. The Nagaoka MP110. I love this cartridge for rock and roll. I do. I love it. It's got a lot of punch. It tracks really well. It looks good. I like it. I like it. It's an elliptical diamond stylus. I believe that the red and the blue are also elliptical. Now here's one that's not elliptical. This was about 160 bucks. I did a video on this. This is the VM 95 ML. Again, about 160 bucks. ML stands for Microline. Microline is kind of a more slender stylus that theoretically gets deeper into your groove and extracts more information. Again, we're talking on a level here that's $200 or less. Cartridges can go up to $20,000. So, you know, we're dealing with, you know, this is beginner stuff here. But, you know, in general, this stuff plays really well, tracks really well, not going to damage your records. And then finally, there's a whole line of Sumiko. It starts with the Sumiko RANIER, excuse me. And that's a good place to start. And then you can move up. You can replace the stylus and actually upgrade. So those are all the possibilities there under 200. Well, not all the possibilities, but some of my recommendations. And if I can find the time, I'll put all the links below, all right? I think that's kind of what I want to cover today. Again, this is beginners. This is a primer. Don't hate in the comments. This is for the folks that are just leaning in. This is my take on things, how I do things. In the next video, we'll talk about storing records and record cleaning machines and maybe some other accessories. But hopefully this video gets you to think about how deep you want to get into this hobby. What you really want out of it, what you want to put back into it. Vinyl is great. I love it. We have fun in this room. This is my little Japanese kisa bar, as you know from watching my videos, and we have fun here on the weekends, and just my friends come over and they bring their records or pick out records here, and we just have a good time. It's a real legitimate community, the vinyl community, and it's a lot of fun. I don't want you to be discouraged. Do your research, and if you have any questions, you can put them below. I'll do my best to answer them. All right, that's it. That's all I got for you. I'm exhausted. I'll see you next time on the United States of Analog. Oh man, I completely forgot about phono preamps. Did I talk about that in the first video?